Hi, welcome to Informatica Cloud videos. In this video, we'll be looking at how to do looping or pagination using application integration product. Before we get on to a demo or a hands-on, let's look at what is the concept of looping and pagination. Let's discuss the various use case in detail. Here we had categorized two important use cases. Both the use cases are related to iteration concept. In the first use case, we are making a REST request to an endpoint and we receive a response wherein an object is repeated or unbound. And we would like to iteratively read the same element which is being repeated in the object, and we would like to see to it that we print the output of it as a response. In the second use case, we go ahead and make multiple API calls to the REST endpoint, thereby do a pagination. And we retrieve each and every response and read through specific elements to create a new response and send it back as an output. The first use case uses xquery to do a looping. In the second use case, we rather do a pagination. Let's take the first use case and see how the use case functions. This is the REST endpoint, which tries to list the list of user IDs, ID, title, and the completed status. This is called as a to-dos endpoint, and when we execute this particular endpoint, we get a response like this. There is an object which is unbound over here, which needs to be read. The goal of this particular exercise would be to read those user IDs or ID values which has completed status as true. Now let's go ahead and look at the process in detail and how it functions. Log on to Informatica Cloud portal, navigate to Design, Services and Processes. On the design palette, you need to select Process as the option and then select the appropriate process to view. In this case, I'd already designed and developed this process, so we'll be looking this process in detail now. Before even we get onto the process, we need to see how the connection and the service connector behaves. So let me open up the service connector and the connection which has been created. So here we have created two actions, one for the to-do and another for the command. The first case is to use the to-do endpoint, which would get multiple user IDs and their completed status. After you had created a service connector, please publish the service connector and create a connection for the same. After you had published the connection, you can use the connection in the process. Once you have defined or created a process, see to it that you go ahead and create appropriate output field in order to capture it as part of the list client. On need basis, you can use a temporary field as well. That had configured the process to allow anonymous access. And also for debugging purpose, I had used tracing level as verbose. As part of the service connector, I don't have any inputs, but I do have an output which will be read. Once I get the output from the endpoint, I go ahead, use the xquery in order to loop through the object which is unbound or repetitive and read only those objects using a condition where it says the completed status is true. And the same gets assigned to the output variable and gets sent. Now let's use a REST client to execute this particular query and see the results. But before we execute it, let's understand what is the URL which we need to use in order to execute this process. Once the process is published, you would see there is a service URL which is required to execute this process. In this case, I'm using a Postman as a REST client, and I had copy pasted the URL over here with the appropriate verb. Let me click on send and execute the query, and you could see the output over here. So this is a very good example for looping or iterating through a given response. Now let's look at the second use case. For a user ID and a given ID, there is a title and a body. And there is a pagination which we can perform over here by changing the resource of the URL. As you could see, for every page number provided in the URL, there is a different comment which pops up. So the goal of this exercise is to see to it that we read all these title or the body with the ID. Now let's go back to the process and see how we actually define this and execute. As part of the service connector, I have an action name called as comment in order to make this particular call. There is an input for this action. Had made the service to configure allow anonymous access, and I'm running this process in the cloud server. There is one output field and one temporary field. If you want, you can configure it for verbose. As part of the first step, which is a service call, I see to it that I get the input number and go ahead and use it as part of the service connector input. I use a temporary counter. As a next step, I see to it that I take the output and concatenate it with the title which I'm trying to read from the response for the first request made. Then I make a decision, and in this decision I see whether the counter value is less than 100 or not. If it is less than 100, then I go ahead and use assignment in order to increment the counter and jump back to the first step. So till 100, there is a pagination which goes back and forth using this jump step and the first process. When the counter reaches 100, then it goes ahead and performs an end of this particular process. This is the service URL of the process which I'm trying to execute it now. As you could see, it has gone ahead and produced an output concatenating all the ID and the title values. With this, we come to the end of the session. We would like to hear from you. You can always post your comments to supportvideos@informatica.com or tweet us at twitter.com/infasupport. Thank you.